Imagine for a second that you're walking through this really beautiful, bustling city. The architecture is stunning, the people are smiling, the traffic lights are, perfectly synchronized. Everything just works.
Right. It feels like a perfectly tuned machine.
Exactly. But then you trip over an uneven paving stone. And when you look down, you realize the sidewalk is actually made of, like, painted plywood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. You look closer at this grand bank building right next to you, and it's just a two-dimensional canvas facade. It's held up by cheap wooden scaffolding. And the illusion just completely breaks.
And you can't unsee that scaffolding.
Never. You can never walk through that city the exact same way again. The buildings haven't changed, but your perception of them has been, well, permanently, irreversibly altered. So welcome, everyone, to vpod.ai. I'm Mike, your host, and sitting across from me is our guest expert, Susan.
It is so fantastic to be here for this conversation today.
Before we jump in, a quick note. You can sponsor this podcast for just $25. Your message will be featured across major platforms like Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and more. If you're interested, visit vpod.ai to get started today.
That really is a great opportunity.
It is. Anyway, getting back to it, that city of painted plywood, that is the core of what we are unpacking today. We are exploring this incredibly thought-provoking essay by Leonidas Rossini about what he calls the curse of awareness.
The curse of awareness. It's such a heavy concept.
It really is. The mission for our discussion today is to unpack exactly what happens when you start noticing the hidden incentives, the performative behaviors, and, the social scripts that are just running all around you.
And more importantly, how you actually survive that sudden clarity without collapsing into total isolation and cynicism.
Exactly. Because before we can understand the curse of this awareness, we first need to look at the baseline, right? Like, how do most of us actually navigate the world?
Right, which is through unconscious participation. The assumption most of us hold is that gaining awareness is this purely liberating triumph. Like, we equate seeing the truth with absolute freedom.
Like taking the red pill, and suddenly you're free.
Exactly like that. But Rossini posits that the immediate byproduct of profound awareness isn't freedom at all. It's actually a terrifying sense of distance.
Distance from other people.
Yes, and from society itself. But to understand the mechanics of why that distance opens up, we really have to establish that baseline we mentioned. We have to look at how humans operate before they trip over that paving stone.
Which is what we call our inherited reality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you really think about the mechanics of it, it's staggering.
It really is.
You, me, everyone listening, we inherit our entire operational reality years before we even possess the cognitive tools to evaluate it.
Mm-hmm.
Before a child even knows what a society is, their family, their school system, their culture, they've all basically downloaded an entire framework into their brain.
They are handed a complete value system, completely prepackaged.
Right.
And the evolutionary mechanism behind that download is pure survival. Human beings require profound psychological stability before they can even begin to dabble in abstraction.
Because a child's brain can't just construct meaning out of thin air.
Precisely. It can't construct meaning out of a void, so it treats the surrounding cultural environment as foundational truth. And from a biological standpoint, the human brain consumes an enormous amount of metabolic energy.
Oh, right. It takes a lot of calories to think hard.
Exactly. It simply cannot afford the caloric cost of evaluating every single social interaction or institution or belief system from first principles every single morning. So we rely on cultural heuristics. We just offload our reality onto social structures.
It's almost like being dropped into an incredibly complex multiplayer video game at birth.
That is a great way to look at it.
You don't sit down and demand to read the source code. You don't question the physics engine. You just pick up the controller and start playing to survive.
You press the jump button because you see everyone else doing it, and it gets you over the obstacle.
Exactly. You accept the progression mechanics of the game.
Yeah.
Go to school, get a career, acquire a mortgage, achieve status, as these self-evident laws of physics. And you do that simply because millions of other players around you are treating those rules as absolute.
And that shared participation is exactly what makes large-scale civilization functional in the first place. We coordinate our behavior through collective simplification.
So large groups basically need these shared assumptions just to coordinate.
Yes. If you look at fiat currency, for example, it is essentially a shared illusion. A dollar bill has absolutely no intrinsic objective value.
Right, it's just a piece of paper.
But because millions of us collectively agree to suspend our disbelief and treat it as valuable, it functions perfectly. The exact same mechanism applies to status hierarchies or institutional authority and professional titles.
Okay, I totally understand the utility of it, but classifying things like professional titles or social status as shared illusions, I mean, it almost makes human society sound like a massive, intentional scam.
I can see why you'd say that.
Like, if all these structures only exist because we collectively pretend they do, isn't that just a really polite way of saying human interaction is fundamentally fake?
It is entirely natural to view it that way once you notice the artificiality. But that conflates artificiality with malice. These constructs aren't malicious lies designed to trick you. They are necessary stabilizing protocols.
So they aren't a scam, they're just a tool.
Exactly. If you had to philosophically rebuild the concept of abstract economic value in your mind every single time you bought a cup of coffee, the cognitive friction would completely paralyze you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you'd never get anything done. You'd just be having an existential crisis at the barista counter.
Exactly. Unconscious participation in these narratives reduces that friction. It prevents millions of people from slipping into constant existential panic, which allows them to cooperate. The illusion isn't a scam, it's essentially the operating system of civilization.
That makes the stakes of this essay incredibly high. Because if unconscious participation is the very thing holding society together, what happens when a system update fails?
Right. What happens when it breaks down?
Yeah, what happens when you experience a glitch in your perception and you actually start reading the code behind the game?
Well, that transition is rarely a single cinematic epiphany. It's not like you just wake up one day and see it all. The shift usually manifests as a slow, creeping accumulation of anomalies.
Like you start noticing things don't quite add up.
Right. You start noticing tiny contradictions between what people say and the actual structural incentives driving their behavior. And over time, those micro-observations compound, and the baseline illusion simply can no longer hold its shape.
The day-to-day symptoms of that shift have got to be incredibly disorienting.
They absolutely are.
I mean, you'll be sitting at a standard corporate dinner party, and suddenly the dialogue sounds entirely rehearsed. Someone across the table tells, a self-deprecating joke, and instead of just laughing, your brain immediately flags it.
It flags it as a preemptive defense mechanism.
Yes, a mechanism designed to secure their social standing within the hierarchy of that specific room. Or you look at a leader projecting absolute confidence, and you instantly perceive the sheer panic and performative energy required to maintain that mask.
And it doesn't stop with other people. You even turn that lens inward. You realize that your own career ambitions were likely installed by your culture rather than chosen by your authentic self.
Wow, you suddenly gain the ability to see multiple layers of reality simultaneously.
Exactly. Previously, if an acquaintance asked about your weekend, you merely heard a polite question. Post-shift, you hear the question, you recognize the social equilibrium the question is meant to establish, you see the image the person is attempting to project, and you calculate the underlying motive.
So spoken language basically becomes a cover for entirely different psychological needs.
Yes, the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche explored the terror of this exact realization. He argued that deeper awareness inherently divorces a person from the collective herd.
Because you can't unsee the incentives.
Right. Once you perceive the raw structural incentives and the intricate social signaling governing human behavior, you cannot force yourself to unsee them. The external environment remains identical, the dinner party's still happening, the people are still talking, but your internal lens of interpretation has permanently, radically shifted.
And that shift destroys your ability to engage with reality through psychological simplicity. You are no longer fully present in the moment. Your consciousness kind of splits.
Exactly. A part of you is participating, but a larger part of you is permanently hovering above the interaction, just observing and decoding the mechanisms beneath it.
But let me push back forcefully here for a second. If the entire system is built on performative scaffolding, and I've developed the ability to see through that performance, shouldn't my default stance be deep cynicism?
Many people feel that way, yes.
Like, if I know the game is rigged and people are primarily driven by hidden incentives, isn't cynicism the only rational, intellectually honest response? Why shouldn't I view this hyper-awareness as an absolute advantage, like a superpower that protects me from being manipulated?
Cynicism feels like a superpower because it offers the illusion of safety. If you distrust every motive, you can never be blindsided. But cynicism isn't intellectual rigor, it's cognitive rigor mortis.
Cognitive rigor mortis. Wow.
It is an emotional reaction to feeling duped by the system, dressed up as sophistication. If you assume that because social structures contain performance, all human meaning must therefore be fake, you aren't seeing reality more clearly. You are just filtering reality through a thick lens of resentment.
It's defensive posture. You're basically wearing dark glasses and claiming you've mastered the light.
Precisely the point. And the cost of maintaining that defensive posture is devastating to the individual. When your awareness expands faster than your emotional capacity to integrate it, you fall into the analyst's trap.
The analyst's trap.
Yes. Your hyperperceptive mind starts treating ordinary human life as a puzzle to be solved rather than an experience to be lived. Spontaneity is entirely eradicated.
And the mechanics of that eradication are exhausting to even think about. Let's say a colleague walks up to you and compliments your recent work. In the old unconscious state, you'd feel a rush of dopamine, you'd smile, and you'd just, thank you.
Simple, easy interaction.
Right. But in the hyper-aware state, the compliment triggers an immediate background processor in your mind. You start thinking, are they being genuine? Is this a networking tactic? Are they managing their own insecurities by aligning with me? Are they attempting to establish a reciprocal obligation?
And before you can even formulate a response, you've dissected the interaction into cold, hard data. Doing that for every interaction, every single day, demands a massive cognitive toll.
You stop interacting with the actual breathing human beings in front of you.
Exactly. You start interacting with psychological models of their behavior. You're entirely trapped in pattern recognition.
It's like being a professional film critic who sits down to watch a massive summer blockbuster.
Well, that's a perfect analogy.
Everyone else in the theater's laughing, they're eating popcorn, they're just letting the spectacle wash over them. But the critic is miserable. They're obsessing over a slight lighting inconsistency in the background, a minor pacing issue in the second act, or the predictable arc of the protagonist.
They can't turn it off.
No, they have destroyed their own capacity to enjoy the movie because they cannot turn off the analytical machinery.
And human functionality requires baseline trust to operate smoothly. When you lose the ability to deploy that trust, you begin to watch your social connections erode.
Especially the older ones, right?
Yes, this is especially true for relationships built on unconscious alignment friends you had simply because you shared the same daily routines, the same office building, or the same unquestioned cultural assumptions.
Because once you start aggressively questioning the inherited structures underneath those bonds, the emotional resonance simply fades. The shared illusion that held the friendship together just evaporates.
It does.
So we have an individual who is already exhausted by the sheer computing power required to decode their private life. But if that internal struggle wasn't enough, we then take this highly aware, hyper-analytical person and force them to operate in modern digital environments.
Which is just a recipe for disaster.
We throw them into the algorithmic feed, which functions like a high-speed sorting machine that categorizes human emotion by volume and velocity rather than actual value.
The digital sphere absolutely weaponizes the exact vulnerabilities of the overanalyzer. To understand why, you have to look at the economic architecture of these platforms. They are optimized purely for engagement, and in an attention-based economy, absolute certainty scales infinitely better than nuance.
Because nuance is computationally expensive for the consumer. If someone presents a nuanced argument filled with caveats, historical context, and trade-offs, it introduces cognitive friction.
The scrolling user has to pause, reflect, and actually weigh the variables.
Right, and the platform's algorithm inherently suppresses anything that slows down consumption.
Certainty, however, demands no reflection. A loud, absolute, binary opinion triggers an immediate emotional reaction. Anger, validation, tribal solidarity. It bypasses the analytical brain and strikes directly at the nervous system.
So the system structurally rewards the appearance of extreme confidence.
Exactly. Regardless of whether there is any actual depth or truth beneath the performance.
It's a terrifying structural reality. Our primary communication infrastructure economically values visibility over careful thinking. It actively punishes hesitation.
And highly reflective people hesitate naturally.
Right. If you are a highly reflective person, the kind of person who naturally pauses because you see the competing variables, you notice the missing context, and you spot the contradictions, you are functionally incompatible with an environment that demands rapid identity signaling.
And the psychological toll this takes on the aware individual is profound. They perceive the immense tangled complexity of the world, but they are trapped in an architecture that forces them to compress that reality into simplified, polarized slogans if they want to be heard at all.
Participating in that space begins to feel like an aggressive act of self-betrayal,
It does. They feel intense pressure to project certainty when their actual internal state is one of deep ambiguity.
which naturally leads to total withdrawal. They don't log off because they suddenly hate society. They log off because the constant exposure to accelerated, monetized performance induces absolute cognitive failure. They just can't process the noise anymore.
It creates an intense feedback loop of isolation. You see the scaffolding, you realize everyone around you is mistaking the scaffolding for the actual building, and when you try to point it out, the system hands a megaphone to the person screaming that the scaffolding is made of solid gold.
So how do we break the loop? If we can't unsee the painted plywood, if we can't unlearn the complexities of the system, and if the digital world continues to punish careful thought, how do we survive? We can't all just, move to a cabin in the woods.
Right, that's not practical.
How do we transition out of this exhausting state into something sustainable?
The mechanism of survival requires a transition from immature awareness to mature awareness.
Okay, break that down for me.
Immature awareness is the state we've been describing. The nervous system trapped in endless interpretation, the compulsive need to decode every interaction, the cynical assumption that all performance is inherently toxic. Mature awareness, on the other hand, requires a completely different operational framework.
What does that framework actually look like in practice?
It revolves around the conscious choice of restraint. With mature awareness, you don't magically forget that the systems are flawed or that social interactions are performative. You don't put the blindfold back on.
Because you can't.
Right, you can't. But you intentionally choose to stop letting the analytical machinery consume you. You learn the precise application of selective trust.
So it's about recognizing that wisdom isn't the act of analyzing a situation to death. Real wisdom is knowing exactly when to turn the analyzer off. It's the ability to look at a colleague giving you a compliment, recognize the subtle social positioning happening in the background, and then consciously decide, you know what? I am going to ignore the metadata and just accept the compliment at face value.
That is the exact mechanism. You allow yourself to participate in the ordinary experience, even while knowing it's imperfect. And the bridge that allows you to do that is compassion.
Compassion.
Yes, this is the pivotal shift. When the glitch first happens, you view the performative behavior of others through a lens of judgment. You see them as manipulative, shallow, or foolish.
But mature awareness fundamentally reframes that behavior.
Exactly. When you look deeper, past the immediate annoyance of the performance, you realize that the vast majority of human behavior is driven by profound fragility.
People are just trying to get by.
Right. People are operating out of deep-seated insecurity, a fear of ostracization, and a desperate biological need for belonging. They aren't cold, calculating architects of despection.
They are terrified individuals improvising their way through a chaotic existence.
Clinging to whatever social scripts provide them with a sense of safety. When you genuinely internalize how constrained and frightened human beings are, that harsh, cynical judgment dissolves. You realize they are holding up the cardboard facades because they are terrified the city will collapse on top of them if they let go.
It's an issue of survival for them. And for me, this is the ultimate paradigm-shifting realization. The ultimate purpose of seeing the truth, of gaining deep awareness, was never to shatter your worldview and leave you isolated in the rubble. The purpose of clarity is steadiness.
Steadiness through conscious participation.
Yes. You reach a point of what some philosophers call second naivete. You see the illusion, you understand exactly how the trick is performed, but you choose to participate in the magic show anyway.
Because the human connection you experience in the theater is worth the price of the illusion.
Exactly. You learn to recognize the flaws in human systems while intentionally remaining emotionally capable of engaging with them.
And as you operationalize this steadiness, a very natural evolution occurs in your private life. You begin to radically shrink your social circles. And this behavior is frequently misunderstood by outside observers as arrogance or elitism.
Right. People assume you are cutting them off because you think you've reached some elevated intellectual plane and they are suddenly beneath you.
But the internal reality is entirely different. Highly aware individuals shrink their circles because alignment of values becomes exponentially more important than mere social stimulation.
They realize how expensive it is to manage performative relationships.
Exactly. They know how much caloric and emotional energy is required to manage incompatible values. They simply choose to stop spending that energy.
They seek out a microenvironment, a small cluster of individuals, where the analytical lens can finally be set down. A space where trust doesn't have to be constantly verified, where conversations can tolerate ambiguity, and where no one is aggressively managing their status hierarchy.
They're just creating a safe harbor where they are allowed to just be human.
That safe harbor is essential for maintaining the emotional reserves needed to interact with the broader performative world. It allows you to walk back out into the painted city with compassion rather than resentment.
It really is a phenomenal framework for navigating the exhaustion of modern life.
We've charted a massive journey today. We started in the absolute comfort of inherited reality, blindly accepting the societal code downloaded into our brains.
And we explored the turbulent, disorienting glitch where the hidden incentives suddenly become painfully visible.
We examined the dangerous detour into cynicism, where the mind becomes trapped in an endless loop of analysis, a state actively exploited and amplified by digital platforms that weaponize certainty.
Before ultimately uncovering the mechanics of mature awareness, the conscious choice to deploy restraint, to view human fragility with deep compassion, and to find steadiness by intentionally participating in the shared illusions that connect us.
It leaves us with a critical, very personal challenge to consider. Take a hard look at your own social circles, your daily routines, and the digital spaces you inhabit.
It's a tough thing to do, but necessary.
If you were to systematically strip away every single relationship, interaction, or online presence, where you feel fundamentally required to perform, where you have to carefully manage your image or suppress your true observations, who and what would actually be left?
It is a question that instantly reveals the true architecture of your life.
It cuts right to the bone. And the next time you find yourself sitting in a meeting or at a dinner party, secretly dissecting the conversation in real time, mapping out the hidden motives and structural incentives of the person speaking to you, issue yourself a challenge.
Ask yourself if you can pause.
Exactly. Ask yourself, can you pause the analytical machinery just long enough to simply be human in that exact moment? Can you recognize the painted scaffolding, but still choose to appreciate the beauty of the city? Thank you all so much for tuning in to vpod.ai today. We hope this exploration brought you a genuine sense of steadiness. Until next time, take care.